first speaker is Sandy Nairne. Sandy is a long-time admirer, a promoter of Morris and his work, who has a particular affection for Kelmscott, and he will, I'm sure, be known to many of you already, as he's just recently retired as director of the National Portrait Gallery. Sandy.
Good morning. Let me start with William Morris's own words. I turned a little to my right, and through the hawthorn sprays and long shoots of the wild roses, could see the flat country spreading out far away under the sun of the calm evening, till something that might be called hills, with a look of sheep pastures about them, bounded it with a soft blue line. The raised way led us to a little field bounded by a backwater of the river on the one side. On the right hand, we could see a cluster of small houses and barns, new and old, and before us, a grey stone barn and a wall partly overgrown with ivy, over which a few grey gables showed. Now, many of you will know that's a description, not really, but of course it is, of Kelmscott, but from News from Nowhere. It's at the moment at the end of the journey up the river where the narrator comes to Kelmscott, if we may say it is, as the place, if you like, of a future that respects the past. I was very taken to discover that in June 1889, someone else who visited Kelmscott at that moment had a slightly different discovery. The Victorian painter George Dunlop Leslie was a great river person, a great promoter of punting. Leslie and his wife walked along the towpath from Lechlade, and they walked downriver, and they came to Kelmscott, and they thought it was empty. They thought no one was there. So they chanced it to open the door through the wall, and at that moment, a great head with hair came out of an upper window. And of course, it was Morris, who invited them in and gave them a tour, showed them the house, and Leslie later wrote in his diary, "I never saw an old house so lovingly and tenderly fitted up and cared for as this one. The perfect taste and keeping of the furniture and hangings, and the way in which the original beauties of the house had been preserved, was indeed a lesson to be remembered." My own arrival at Kelmscott was nothing like so dramatic, but it was by river. And I'd punted with my wife, Lisa, from Oxford, and I do think arriving by Kelmscott from the river is the only way to come, of course, originally with the great elm trees, now sadly no longer there. But of course, when I arrived, I couldn't go in, because although the house was occasionally open, it was only occasional. And I think that my own interest and engagement with Kelmscott has over the years been the opening up that the Society has already been making over a long period, the conservation of which I've known something and have had a real interest. But I suppose more than anything, the sense of a sharing of somewhere that's a very important place, it's an important house, it's an important set of collections. And I think even from that description, one knows from Morris's thinking that somehow that indescribable link between place, house, collections and people that make it so important. And of course we can think about the design principles that Morris always had running around in his head. We can think about his views about a socialist future. It is the same moment that Leslie arrived that Morris was writing News from Nowhere. It's that summer of 1889. And it's at Kelmscott that Morris thinks about how might we make a better society? How might we order things in a way that art would be an everyday part of everybody's life? So I suppose for me, put simply, Kelmscott is an extraordinarily inspiring place. It's Morris that has made it, but it is also the place that made a great deal of Morris. And I think that the Society's plans now to share it further, to conserve it, to find it, if you like, back in its landscape, to think about how for many, many future generations it can be that place of inspiration is the most important thing. And let me finish with just a short final passage from News from Nowhere, where Ellen, the companion of our narrator, she says, "Yes, friend, this is what I came out to see, this many-gabled old house built by the simple country folk of the long past times. And I do not wonder at our friends tending it carefully and making much of it. It seems to me as if it had waited for these happy days and held in it the gathered crumbs of happiness of the confused and turbulent past. Thank you.